Hi, everyone. Welcome to another Bluestem Author Chat. My name is Kim Hazel Rudden. I am the Bluestem Publicity Co-Chair. Heather Cribbs is the other co-chair, and she's not able to join us today. I'll turn it over to our other aisle representatives here. So Heidi, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Heidi Knuth. I am the Bluestem chair, chair of the Bluestem committee. Sorry.
There, I'm Carolyn Kinsella, and I'm aisle executive secretary, and we are just very excited to offer the Bluestem program as well as the Monarch and Lincoln, and to have authors available for all of these different students. So welcome and enjoy.
And we have students or classes here from Geneva, Illinois, from Oak Mill, Illinois. And most importantly, today we have our author of Almost Human. I'm sorry, I went blank. We have
The
Last Human.
Yes.
We have Lee Bacon, who's here, and I'm going to turn it over to him to introduce himself. We're happy to have him here.
Great. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. Thanks for taking the time to chat today. Yes, my name is Lee Bacon. I am the author of The Last Human. So I'm calling in from Maplewood, New Jersey. Maplewood is close to New York City. So if you're looking on a map, you just look at like Manhattan, New York City, and then just go a little bit west, and you'll eventually hit Maplewood. Yeah, and I am just super excited to be here and to get the chance to chat with you. So I think pretty soon we'll turn it over to, we'll do a Q&A. I wanted to just take a very brief moment to let you guys know. So a lot of people think that, because my name is on the cover, it says Lee Bacon right there on the cover. They assume that I write these books alone, but I've got a secret to share with you. I haven't told anyone this. So, this is a little bit, I'm going to ask you to keep this a secret, but I actually have, I write these books with two co-authors and I'll be honest, they do most of the work. So I'm going to introduce you to the co-authors right now of the book, of all the books that I write. So here comes the first one. All right, first co-author, and her name is Lola. That's Lola. All right. She's a very cute cat, and she does a lot of the work. Let me introduce you to my other co-author. I'll be right back. All right. The other co-author is a little bit bigger, and she does a lot of work too. So here we go. This is Pipa. So you guys, I want to keep it a secret though. I want people to think that it's just me writing these books, and because I don't want to share any of the royalties with my cats. But yeah, I do have those two co-authors. Okay, so that's it for kind of a quick introduction. And yeah, we can move on to a question and answer if you guys want to.
All right, thank you. So I do want to say that doing these chats, seeing all the authors' pets have been my favorite part. You guys always bring them on, and that's awesome. All right, so we're going to start with Miss Butt's class, and then so Miss Henning, just be ready. If your class isn't asking questions, just be sure to stay on mute. So I'm going to turn over to you guys.
Go ahead. My first question is, how does it feel to be an author?
How does it feel to be an author? First of all, I love your tie. That's a nice, that's a cool touch. How does it feel to be an author? It's great. I've been writing since I was in elementary school. I've always enjoyed writing. I didn't ever, for the longest time, I didn't think I would be able to, have a career as a writer, to get published and make money as a writer. That seemed like a far off, impossible thing to even imagine. For the longest time, I just kind of enjoyed doing it. It was, I'm sure everyone in that room, in your room, you have your things that you enjoy. If you've got a bit of time, a bit of free time, the thing that you just kind of do whenever you just sort of feel like doing something fun. For me, writing was one of those things. And I didn't really start taking it more seriously and thinking about possibly becoming a published, getting my books published until I was much older, until I was in college. And even then it took me a long time to get anything published. I wrote things that got rejected, and I, had to kind of figure out how to get up to the level where I was good enough to write something that was worth publishing. So, so the fact that I'm able to now write these books and have them get published, and then do things like this, where I get to actually, chat with the students who are reading them. I love it. It's the best. It's the job that I would most want to do in the world. So I consider myself super fortunate. Excellent question.
Hi. My question is, have you always enjoyed writing?
Have I always enjoyed writing? Well, and you're also wearing a tie. Is today like tie day or something? Yeah.
It's a theme day.
I figured. Well, I love it. I like the formal attire. Have I always wanted to be a writer? Yeah. Like I said, with the last question, it was something that I always enjoyed doing. But I didn't know whether I'd be able to actually make a living as a writer. Nobody in my family did anything like that as, for a career. I didn't know any published authors. So it seemed like such a remote, far off possibility that for me, I kind of thought like, okay, I'll just do it for fun. And, maybe I'll just sort of do it as a hobby. I didn't know whether I'd actually be able to make a living as a writer. So, but yeah, it was definitely something that I always wanted to do. So I consider myself super, super grateful that I'm able to actually do that and get books that go out in the world every once in a while and people read them. Yeah.
Okay.
Good question.
Thank you. All right, going over to Ms. Henning's class, and then Ms. Lawless, if you want to have your two students ready after them.
So, hi, Tom Lawless. Mrs. Henning's class and I, we're in the same building. So I'm just going to jump in for her. She's going to have a couple of her students come over here too. We're both at Fabian Elementary School. So here's our first question.
How hard was writing your book?
How hard was it to write a book? How hard was it to write a book? I think the hardest thing is just sticking with it every day. I don't know because books take time. I always compare it to like the difference between, a sprint, like the 50-yard dash. I don't know, maybe you guys, do you do the 50-yard dash or something like that in PE at school? Maybe so, or something like that, where you're like, you have to run really fast for a kind of short distance. So writing a novel is not like that. It's a lot more like a marathon, where you're just like, you just got to keep going and keep going. You don't want to go too fast or too hard at any one point. It's kind of like that. And so every day, you just want to kind of do a little bit more, write a few pages, maybe even just write a few paragraphs. And then over time, you kind of go back and you realize, oh, wow, I wrote 100 pages, I wrote 200 pages, whatever it is. But at the time, it can feel kind of like a slog. And, sometimes it can be hard to just sit down day after day and just do that work. So that I think is the hardest part, is just like sitting down every day and working on it day after day and, running that marathon of writing a novel. But it's also, like I said, with the last question, it's the thing I love doing most. So I'm really glad I get to do it, even though sometimes it is challenging. Good question.
What inspired you to be a writer?
Oh, what inspired me to be a writer? I think it really started with it was something that I enjoyed doing. I mentioned I was writing these like stories when I was a kid. And these stories were nothing, it wasn't like I was writing these, amazing stories that were, getting published at 8 years old, or I was walking around my elementary school telling people like, ooh, I'm going to be a fancy pants published author. That was never something that, was in my mind at the time. It was just something that I enjoyed. It was kind of like a hobby, a passion. So it really started there, and then kind of grew out of that. And I started taking it more seriously and started thinking about, okay, how can I potentially get other people to read these things that I'm writing? But at the beginning, it just started with like, this is something I enjoy doing. Good question. Thank you.
All right, we're back to Ms. Butt's class.
What do you do when you're waiting for a book to get published?
Oh, I like that question. So what do I do when I'm waiting for a book to get published? Yes, the publishing process is very, very slow. It's, you might, from the time it takes from a publisher saying, yes, we want to publish your book, to the book actually coming out in a bookstore can take a year, year and a half, sometimes even 2 years. It can be a really long process. And for some of that time, you're editing the book, you're revising it, you're doing all the things that you do to try to make the book as good as possible once it finally does come out. Some of that time, you're also working on, making the cover as good as possible. A lot of times, they'll kind of send a sketch of what they have in mind for the cover. And then, I'll comment on it, and then I'll, kind of go back and forth. And then eventually you'll get the cover that looks like the finished version. Like the cover for The Last Human, this illustration took a lot just to kind of get it in the shape that it looks now. Like the earlier versions, it either looked, I don't know, it just looked either too scary or maybe too cartoonish or too weird or something, just like there were all these different iterations. So you're doing some of that too. But then there are long periods where like I'm not working on the book because I'm close to being done with it. And during those periods, I'm working on whatever the next book is. So, usually I'm kind of writing away on, whatever I hope is going to come out next. And then by the time, the book that is published, the one that I've been working on all this time, then I might have written or come close to writing a whole other book. So kind of some part of the process is just writing the next book while I'm in the process of the book before it coming out. Good question.
How long have you been writing for?
How long have I been writing for? Okay, so like I mentioned earlier, I've always, I've enjoyed writing for a long time. I was writing kind of just these weird, goofy stories when I was in elementary school, and the goal was never like, I was not thinking I was writing these, beautiful masterpieces or anything. I really kind of thought like the goal was just to make people laugh. I just tried to write like, if I could write something that was funny and maybe a little bit outrageous, and I would read it out loud to my friends or to my family, and if someone chuckled or someone laughed, that felt really good. That was kind of like, okay, I did it, and that's kind of still my goal in a way. I still kind of want to make people laugh and write funny, goofy stories. But so in that way, I've been writing for a long time. As far as writing books that are getting published, my first book, which is this one, Joshua Dredd, that came out in 2012. So probably right around the time some of you were born. And yeah, that one came out in 2012. So I've been getting books published for about 11 years. And hopefully I'll keep getting books published for many more years. Good question.
All right, we're back to the Henning/Lawless classes. Turn over to you guys.
Why robots?
Why robots? Good question. Okay, so why write about robots? I mean, there's so many different things you can write about why robots. Well, I think I am so fascinated by technology. We're all surrounded by technology. I mean, look at us. We're right now having this author visit using technology as a medium to have our author visit, right? We all, so many people are carrying around these supercomputers in our pockets, right? These little phones that can do so much. We have our laptops, we have our tablets, and then, the internet and everything that enables. So we're surrounded by technology. It sort of runs our lives in a lot of ways, not to mention the technology that's, out there, like the actual robots that are being built and that are building other things. So it kind of starts there. I'm fascinated by technology. It's something that I think is so important in our world. And so it's something that I kind of am interested in writing about and exploring, but finding ways to do it, kind of in a fun and original way that, also you can kind of build a story around. So like The Last Human It takes place in the future. Humans have gone extinct. The world is ruled by robots. The book is actually narrated by a robot. And so the actual story is kind of far off in the future. It's not something that could happen. It's not something, hopefully it's something that will never happen, right? But it's something that, kind of still ties into, I think, our lives now, which is, this idea of technology playing an ever greater role in our lives. So that's why robots.
I have a question. What was the longest book that took you to write?
What's the longest book that I read?
That took you to write.
Oh, what's the longest book that took me to write? The book that took me the longest to write, I'll show you a copy of it. It's this one, Imaginary. So Imaginary is one of my more recent books. It came out kind of recently. And that one took me a really long time to write, not because it's such a long book. It's about the same length as most of the books that I write. The reason why it took me so long, though, was because I kind of had to write it 3 times. I wrote it and it just something didn't quite work with it. So I went back to the drawing board and said, okay, I'm going to try this. I'm going to try this, maybe I'll work on other things and, maybe I'll come back to it someday. We'll see. Then I had it, kind of went back to it at some point later, tried to write it again, still didn't quite work, and put it off to the side again. A little bit more time went by. And eventually I came back to it and, worked on it again, for the 3rd time. And then I kind of figured out, okay, here's how I want to write the book. And so it really took a long time, not so much because, like I said, it's not so much it's like a long book. It's just, for whatever reason, it just took me longer than most to just try to understand how to tell the story and to get it right. So Imaginary was the one that took me the longest to write. Excellent question.
Henning and Lawless will stay with you guys for a couple more. I know you're 2 groups together. And then after yours, we'll go back to Ms. Butt's class.
We have just one question lined up for right now, then we can go back to Mrs. Butt's class.
Okay, perfect.
What book are you working on now?
Oh, what book am I working on now? Okay, so I can share something. This has not been officially announced. I haven't told anyone about this, but it is official. So you guys are going to be among the very first in the world to hear this. And that is the book that I'm working on now is actually a sequel to The Last Human. It's going to be a second Last Human book. And I'm really excited about. I've basically written the whole book. Now I'm in the stage where I'm editing it and revising it. And that's going to come out next year. So if you're reading The Last Human now, or if you've already read it, hopefully, at some point in the future, you'll get to find out kind of what happens next in the book, or in the kind of that world that I've created. So that's what I'm working on now, is a sequel to The Last Human.
All right, Ms. Butt's class, if you have students ready to go.
How many books have you written?
How many books have I written? Oh, good question. So I have written, the number I usually give when I get asked this question is 10 books that I've written. I've written, 7 kind of traditional books, books that look like, what you would expect to find in the library or a bookstore. But I've also written 3 audio original books. So one was called The Mystery of Alice. One was called Interview with the Robot, another robot book. And then one was called Replaced. And so those are only available as audio books. And they're kind of written in a format that sort of is a little bit more like a script. So if you count those, then that would be 10. Yeah.
Oh, what's your favorite book that you wrote?
What's my favorite book that I've written? Well, I couldn't really pick a favorite. Picking a favorite book is kind of like picking a favorite kid. I don't think I could do that. But I will say, it took me a long time to kind of go from knowing that I wanted to be to try to get something published, that I wanted to make a living as a writer, to actually getting something published. And that included writing a book that I sent out to a bunch of different publishers, and all of the publishers that I sent it out to, like 30 publishers, they all said, no, no, thank you. We do not want your book. And that rejection, obviously, it's never fun to get rejected. So, so that, it took a long time, and it was a lot of work, and it was a lot of, hearing the word no along the way before my first book was actually published. But when it was, that was really special. So, that first book, I think I showed it to you guys earlier, Joshua Dredd, that was really kind of special to me because it was the first one, and it showed me, okay, this is possible. People will maybe want to publish my book. People will maybe want to read my book, the things that I write. So I don't know that I call it my favorite. I wouldn't call any of my books my favorite, but I would say that one is special to me and will always be special for that reason. Excellent question.
All right, now that we're kind of running low on time, we'll do one question from each group. Lawless, Henning, did you all have any other questions? I know you had one a moment ago.
Yep, we have another question here.
Perfect.
If you didn't do the career of writing, what career do you think you would want?
Can you repeat that? I didn't quite hear it.
If you didn't do the career of writing, what career would you do?
If I weren't a writer, what would I be doing? The last job that I had, so I've had a lot of weird jobs over the years. I've worked at a fancy French restaurant. I've worked at I've been I painted a house, like I basically painted a house for a while. I've worked in an art gallery. I've done a lot of interesting things over the years. But the last thing that I was doing, and around the time that my book got published, I was working as a translator. My wife is German, and I lived in Germany for a while. I lived in a city called Munich in Germany. And there I was working as a translator. And actually, once we moved back to the US, I worked as a freelance translator for a while. So I probably would be doing that still, translating stuff from German into English. And that was something that I enjoyed and I thought I was pretty good at. So yeah, that would probably be what I would be doing, but I would not be as happy. I like working as a writer.
How do you get your ideas for books?
Where do I get my ideas for books? Okay, so inspiration can come from anywhere. You kind of never know where inspiration is going to come from. I will give you an example of where I got an idea for The Last Human. So I was walking down the street one day. I was listening to an interview in my headphones, and it was with an interview with a guy named Yuval Harari, who was asked the question, do you think humans will be the dominant life form on this planet in 250 years? And he answered without missing a beat, no. Either we will, wipe ourselves out, or we will be replaced by our own creation, that is technology. And I heard that kind of grim and scary prediction, and I thought to myself, that would make a great book. And so I started writing it that same day. And what I liked about it was, like, even though it sounds dystopian and scary, I wanted to write it as something that was actually bright, and from the beginning anyway, the main character, a story is told by a robot. And so from the beginning anyway, the robots are actually fine with the situation. They're not like, oh, this is so terrible that humans aren't around. They were actually like, oh, actually the world's better off without humans in it. So that was kind of where the inspiration came from for The Last Human.
Right, Ms. Butts, class.
How long did it take you to write The Last Human?
How long did it take to write The Last Human? It took about 6 months to write. I mentioned earlier that it's kind of like a marathon. It was about 6 months to write it. But that is only the first draft. You might know from your own schoolwork that the first draft is not usually the best draft. And so, the first 6 months was writing it, and then but it took another 4 to 6 months, something like that, to get it in the best shape possible. And that's editing it, revising it, reading over sentences and trying to make them better, correcting mistakes, all that stuff. So to get from the first draft to the final draft took another 4 to 6 months. So in the end, it ends up being closer to a year to write the book. Other question?
What is your favorite part of the book that you written, The Last Human?
What's my favorite part of the book that I've written, The Last Human? You know, I think my favorite part, or I'll put it another way, my favorite kind of like character and parts that go along with that is the character of Skid, SKD. And Skid, as you know, if you've read it, Skid has a unique method of communicating. Skid does not communicate with words. Skid communicates with emojis. And so, you know, that was really fun to try to kind of take, you know, these concepts and try to think like, okay, how would Skid say this? How would someone say this if they could only talk with emojis? And that led to a lot of really funny kind of ways of depicting things on the page. And I would, you know, put, and so when you read the book, you see like there are these, sometimes these strings of emojis and you have to try to figure out, okay, what is Skid trying to say here? So that was I think that was my favorite part of it, was just trying to figure all that stuff out.
All right, so we are out of time. Is there anything before we say goodbye that you want to tell us that you didn't get asked, that you'd like to share with us?
Oh no, that covered everything. I think you asked some great questions. Thank you for being such a fun couple of groups. And yeah, I think other than that, thank you for taking the time to chat with me and for reading so many of these books.
Thank you so much. Students, if you want to unmute, you can say your goodbyes. And thank you again for answering questions from our readers today.
Bye.
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 Bye. Thank you.
Nice to
Thank
see
you,
everyone.
everyone.